It's Monday, and that so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. Hello, and welcome to Monster Mondays. I'm Jeff Arbuckle, co-host of the weekly podcast Film Seizure, that you can catch every Wednesday at filmseizure.com or at a number of podcast providers online. It's high time we went back to the Showa era of the Godzilla franchise with this 1965 classic, Invasion of the Astro-Monster, which is also just simply known as Monster Zero. The previous year had been a huge one for Godzilla. He clashed with the eventual series regular Mothra and was introduced to his greatest of foes, Ghidorah, where he needed the help of both Mothra and Rodan to defeat. So, when looking at this film in the totality of the whole series, you could see how 1964 would eventually lead to this film and the constant production of a Godzilla movie for several years to come yet. However, this film would have slightly different origins than just simply being a follow-up to consecutive Godzilla hits. This movie would have U.S. influence for the first time in the series. United Productions of America was looking to acquire high-quality monster flicks to bring over here to North America. American producer Henry G. Saperstein was pretty much given that task. Saperstein was the head of UPA and was the producer on the popular Mr. Magoo animated series on TV, as well as a TV Dick Tracy cartoon. Saperstein would approach Toho for co-production and distribution rights, just as other studios and distributors had worked with Hammer Film Productions to bring their monster movies over here. Saperstein claimed that he fronted 50% of the production cost for 3 movies, Frankenstein Conquers the World, War of the Gargantuas, and this movie, Invasion of the Astro-Monster. His primary request was to simply put a few American actors into the movies, notably Nick Adams, who would star in this film and Frankenstein Conquers the World, though it's also said that Adams was already cast in the latter without Saperstein's suggestion. And then you had Russ Tamblyn in War of the Gargantuas. That would make the film easier to distribute in America. Now, while Saperstein did help with the budget, Invasion of the Astro-Monster was limited by budget as well. Director Ishiro Honda said that it was a constant vicious cycle between time and budget, particularly in this era of the Godzilla franchise. They would reuse some effects and shots done in Rodan and Mothra, and then in Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster. Honda was concerned about how much reused footage they included because he felt that they could fool the audience for a little while, but they would eventually catch on, and worse, they might start complaining that they were paying full price for a new movie and not seeing an entirely new movie. And if they did catch on, they'd stop coming to the films. If they stopped coming to the movies, the studio would start buying into the belief that the effects could no longer sell the movies, even though it really wasn't that. It was the reuse of the effects. So Honda was well aware that the mid to late 60s started to show a decline in the series for a little while because of these limitations. All of this did work out somehow. The film became the 10th highest grossing film of the year for Japan. It was also quite successful in the US as well, grossing more than twice what it did in Japan. It also does have quite the legacy too. It was deemed one of those really good bad movies, the kind that would definitely charm kids, arguably at the intended audience all along, and give the adults who were taking the kids a good time watching because those limitations unintentionally created an air of shoddiness. This continued the turn in the series of giving the monster characters a personality and making Godzilla more of a good guy, particularly for kids to really kind of catch on. Now, this movie begins in an undetermined year. Often it's said that this movie takes place in 1960X. But 2 astronauts, Glenn and Fuji, are on their way to check out the newly discovered planet X. They are radioing home to give them a mission status, and the Japanese astronaut Fuji has a curious relationship with his sister Haruno. She has met someone that she would like to date named Tetsuo. But Fuji doesn't approve of him. Now, more on Haruno and Tetsuo later. Planet X lies between Jupiter and Saturn. It's also causing some issues with magnetic forces on Earth. The astronauts are investigating whether or not there is anything intelligent on the planet. When asked why Planet X had not been discovered until now, apparently the planet is considered, quote, extremely dark, and therefore it just wasn't picking up on telescopes, I guess. Fuji and Glenn do arrive on Planet X and investigate the surface of the planet. They are surprised to find that the gravity is a fraction of Earth's. I think they said it was either 1/2 or 2/3 the gravity force. They're also surprised by thunder and lightning on the planet. Fuji is surprised by Glenn going missing as well, and the spaceship goes missing too. Fuji is told to step into a cylinder that will take him underground by a mysterious voice. Here, the two astronauts meet the inhabitants of the planet, and they're called Xiliens. Again, we'll talk a little bit more about how this movie connects to potentially other movies in the franchise later. But these Xiliens are humanoid beings who are troubled by a creature named Monster Zero. It's soon revealed that it is indeed King Ghidorah, but the Xiliens named it based on their usual number system, so they name it Monster Zero. Xiliens need help getting rid of Monster Zero, and they want to know if Earth can send over some of their monsters to help. In particular, Monster 01 and Monster 02, otherwise known as Godzilla and Rodan. In exchange for the monsters, the Xiliens will give Earth a miracle drug that will, quote, cure all disease. And the astronauts return home to try to convince the people of Earth to let them borrow the monsters. And the United Nations confer with a council of physicians and the head of the collective groups of women, and it is unanimous that they will accept the trade with Planet X. Yeah, literally, a women's group leader and a single doctor help make the decision for the whole world. That's I hope that doesn't really happen in the real world where only 3 people to get together. But anyway, all right, back to Tetsuo and Haruno. So Tetsuo created this alarm thing because he is an inventor. And it's kind of meant to be worn or carried by women to act as a way to get help if they are attacked. And this thing is super duper loud, but he has sold this device to a company that also apparently manufactures toys. The deal was for $100,000 once the company begins marketing the device. The problem is, the company drags their feet and ends up destroying the blueprints for the device. The woman who bought this invention for the company is named Miss Namikawa. She is mysterious and also seems to be dating Glenn. Something is kind of fishy about all of this. Also, Glenn and Fuji are curious about the true intentions of these people from Planet X. They picked up the idea that Planet X may have a shortage of water, and when Glenn was on his date with Namikawa, when he woke up, the guy who called himself the controller on Planet X was in the bungalow he was sharing with his date. Glenn thinks that the Xiliens are planning on taking over Earth, or at least trying to take over a portion of it. In the lake that the Xiliens said the army would find Godzilla, 3 Xilien spaceships rise out and land on the shore. And they explain that they have technology that can capture and carry the monsters from Earth to Planet X. And they demonstrate the device by having one of the transports fly over and pull Godzilla out of the water and encase him in a bubble. The other transport blasts open a mountain where they grab the sleeping Rodan. Glenn, Fuji, and another scientist that they work with in the Space Center leave with the Xiliens to watch Godzilla and Rodan fight Ghidorah, and also to collect the reward with that medicine, the miracle drug, in other words. So they find out that they control, or that the Xiliens control their spaceships by will alone. They have ways to program that into their machines. What's more, Glenn figures out that they can also do the same to plants and other animals. and all of this seems rather worrisome. But they arrive on Planet X, and sure enough, they watch as Godzilla and Rodan are released, and soon Ghidra shows up. Rodan and Godzilla immediately jump into action to take on the three-headed monster. Godzilla shoots atomic breath at him, Rodan drops boulders on him, Godzilla kicks rocks at him. Finally, they force Ghidra to retreat, and Godzilla has a little victory dance. While they watch all of this, Glenn and Fuji have snuck off to try to find out what's really going on with the Xiliens, and their suspicions grow when they are chased by the Xilien foot soldiers. They eventually make it to an elevator where they find a room full of huge blocks of gold where they are cornered and recaptured. And they also find out that all the female Xiliens look the same, like Namikawa. They also learn that water is not that scarce to them, as they were at least led to believe by their observations. They are let off the hook and sent back to Earth with the formula for the miracle drug. Fuji is a bit concerned over leaving Godzilla and Rodan behind, as if they seem unhappy about being left there as they watch the humans fly off. We learn that Glenn's girlfriend, Namikawa, is part of a group of spies sent from Planet X, but Namikawa is scolded for getting a little too close to Glenn and for allowing Tetsuo to follow her to the island so that he can find out what the heck's going on with his invention that she bought from him. When the astronauts return, they play the tape in which the formula is said to be recorded. There is no formula, but orders from Planet X to demand Earth to capitulate to the control of Planet X as a colony. This does not go over well, as protest for peace at all costs clashes with protest for strong resistance, and this is happening all over the world. Glenn is eventually confronted by Namikawa, who does admit that she has fallen in love with him despite being sent there as a spy. She says that he can be saved if he becomes a citizen of Planet X, but he's ultimately captured by the Xiliens, and she slips him a note before she is killed by the soldiers. Meanwhile, the Xiliens begin destroying Earth technology like rockets and radar dishes and so forth. The Xiliens return Rodan and Godzilla as they reveal that both the Earth monsters and King Ghidra are under their control by way of some magnetic waves. The people of Earth have 24 hours to either surrender or be destroyed. The Fix is trying to figure out a way to intercept the magnetic waves controlling the monsters. Glenn and Tetsuo, now imprisoned in the same place, read the note from Namikawa and learn that the Xiliens are vulnerable to sound. In particular, the sound that Tetsuo's machine that he invented emits. He still has a prototype on him, so they use that to escape. Realizing that they can't necessarily figure out what the frequency will be that is being used by the magnetic waves to control the monsters, the humans decide that they have to use a plan that Tetsuo has. Pretty much just amplify his device's sound and point it at the Planet X ships instead of trying to solve the monster problem right out of the gate. Realizing that something seems off about everything that's going on, Planet X moves up their attack to immediately and unleash Godzilla and Rodan on Japan. Soon Ghidra joins the other two, and the three of them make a mess of things while the scientists prepare to broadcast this sound at the Xiliens. They are able to get into a radio station and blast the sound into every car, home radio, etc., and it begins messing up the Xiliens, and the army uses superpowered receivers and speakers to essentially point the sound at the Earth base on a secret island and the flying saucers overhead. They are eventually able to free the three monsters from the Xilien control, and to escape, the Xiliens appear to blow themselves up, but they only escape into the future. And what that means when they say that, well, we don't ever really find out. The monsters wake up and immediately begin starting to fight each other, and they all topple off of a cliff into the sea, and Ghidra resurfaces alone and flees off into space. The humans looking on ponder whether or not Rodan and Godzilla survived. Now, some of what I just went through may sound really familiar, and it really should. This is the same basic concept of aliens controlling monsters to mess up Earth that will be done twice more in its fullest of extents. The next time this happens is in just a few years with Destroy All Monsters, which we will eventually get to in this series. But the third time I just covered on the show back in January, which was Final Wars. This idea of something that is just something that resonated and even had a little bit of an Easter egg in the first Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla movie, when it seemed as though Godzilla was rampaging against people. And then it was found out it was only Mechagodzilla. It even pops up a little bit with Godzilla vs. Kong just last year. With those last two examples are more of a what's going on with Godzilla type of thing, and not the full-on plot lines to those movies. But still, people like this stuff, and it proved to be relatively successful. So let's talk about the three things that I like about Invasion of the Astro-Monster. First, I kind of love how simplistic the sci-fi angle is in this movie. First, there are video conversations between the base and the astronauts. This happens just like you're having a Zoom call today. No time delay, no distortion of video feed, nothing. Don't forget these astronauts are traveling beyond Jupiter. That's a long way away. Hell, it takes more than 3 days for the Apollo missions to travel to the moon. It would take like 7 months to travel to Mars. Jupiter is more than 5 times as far away from the sun as we are. So yeah, that would take something like 2 years to get to Jupiter. And that's just based on what we know is theoretically possible. These guys do it in like, I don't know, a couple of days or something. And I just love that stupid simplicity. I just watched a video on YouTube about whether or not the warp speed travel on Star Trek made sense compared to the size of the galaxy and the projected distances between the supposed worlds in the United Federation of Planets. That's working off of a speed chart of something that would have to be figured in hypothetical figures. Now, those are big starships with advanced warp drives. Some time and distances made more sense than others on Star Trek, but again, they had to kind of fudge that a little bit for a weekly show. This has just this simple rocket with 2 guys in a cockpit who don't appear to have food or any kind of sleeping quarters or anything like that. They just go from Earth to beyond Jupiter in like 2 days. It's such a stupid thing to like about the movie, but it's all part of that fantasy that just seems so quaint in some of these movies. These days, movies could never have this incomprehensible science or be this removed from realistic science. It's like all the planets are in like very near local space to Earth. Like, you know, they're all right next to us, like just like the moon is. It's so stupid, but again, also really charming. Next, despite what some might believe, this was the only time in which Godzilla was seen on a planet other than Earth. A Nintendo game for Godzilla would kind of borrow the idea to put Godzilla on a different planet and pit him against Mothra, or pit him and Mothra, I should say, against several other Toho villain characters. Alien creatures would be very common in both the Godzilla series and the Gamera series, running side by side for the next several years. However, Ghidra being an alien creature, the plan by the Xilien aliens to bring Godzilla and Rodan to Planet X to fight this mysterious Monster X, who turned out to be Ghidra anyway, and the landscape that Godzilla fights on, it all feels very much of its time. But again, very charming in that way too. Plus, that alien landscape is something interesting to look at. Godzilla was no longer that allegory for how man would destroy itself with all these nuclear weapons and such. It's now a fantasy series with heavy doses of science fiction. This maybe isn't quite the same level as 5 of the previous films ahead of it in terms of quality, but it does have a lot of memorable things in it. Thirdly, let's talk about one of those really memorable things. Yes, this is the movie in which Godzilla does a goofy little victory dance after he and Rodan fight off Ghidra. I don't know if the line about Planet X's gravity was meant to set this up or what, but yeah, we've slowly been seeing Godzilla becoming more and more emotive over the last few movies. Now he's just straight up dances. How he does it is that he kind of jumps up and he puts a hand over his head and repeats that with like little chirps of his roar for a shockingly long time in this movie. I know it's only about a 15-second clip, but that's too much for what it is. Yeah, it's fun, and it is something that you and your pals will laugh at kind of lovingly, but it only sets up more silliness that will be coming along in future movies. And on top of that, this movie also shows Ghidorah shooting at Godzilla's feet and making him almost do like a hot foot dance. It's silly, it's over the top, but it's what makes Godzilla movies what they were back then. Now, I do have one last side note about Henry G. Saperstein. While he was over in Japan looking to work for a company to export films here, he acquired a spy movie heavily inspired by the James Bond series at the time. The film was called Kokusei Himitsu Kasatsu Kagi no Kagi. I've probably completely screwed up that pronunciation. What's so interesting about that? Well, he eventually hired Woody Allen, and it was meant to be prepped for a TV special to play here in the States. What became of it, though, was a padded-out theatrical release called What's Up, Tiger Lily? It was completely overdubbed with comedic lines and sound effects, turning a mostly serious spy thriller into a screwball comedy. If you've never seen it, it's hilarious. It probably is a little iffy in taste these days for multiple reasons, but I remember seeing it maybe 20 or 25 years ago, and it was really funny. It predates both Mad Movies and Mystery Science Theater 3000, and probably a very clear influence on both of those shows. So that wraps up this week's Monster Mondays. You can catch new episodes of Monster Mondays each Monday at filmseizure.com. Don't forget to follow Film Seizure at Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and subscribe to Film Seizure to get both the Film Seizure podcast and Monster Mondays at your favorite podcast providers, as well as YouTube. You can also check out my website, bmovieanima.com, to read new articles every Friday morning. We go back to Universal next time for a kind of bizarre monster movie from late in the studio's horror cycle run as we search for the thing that couldn't die. Until next week, stay spooky.